From players absolutely losing it on the course, to heartbreaking mistakes that ruin tournaments. These are the 40 most unbelievable golf fails in the history of the sport. And first, we start with one of the greatest female golfers of all time. Imagine this, you're Lexi Thompson, one of the brightest stars in women's golf. You're leading the Pelican Women's Championship with just 2 holes to play. The crowd is buzzing, the trophy is almost yours, and all you need to do is close it out. But golf is rarely that simple. It all began on the 17th hole. Thompson stood over a 3-foot par putt, a putt so routine that it's practically muscle memory for a pro. The gallery held its breath, and then, the unthinkable. The ball veered left, missing the hole entirely. You could feel the tension shift in the air as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Still ahead, but only just, Thompson arrived at the 18th hole needing a birdie to secure the win. It was a 4-foot putt, longer than the last, but nothing extraordinary for a player of her caliber. The anticipation in the crowd was electric. She struck the ball cleanly and watched in disbelief as it lipped out. With those 2 misses, Thompson found herself in a 4-way playoff against Nelly, Lydia Ko, and Se-Young Kim. On the first playoff hole, Thompson's approach shot was nearly perfect, landing just 5 feet from the pin. Redemption was within reach, but as fate would have it, the birdie putt slid past the cup once more. Meanwhile, Korda sank her putt to claim the championship. For Thompson, it wasn't just about losing a tournament, it was about losing it in a way that will haunt her highlight reel forever. Here's a moment that's as brutal as it is unforgettable. Number 10 on our list takes us to the 2005 U.S. Women's Open at Cherry Hills, where Lorena Ochoa's dreams of her first major title unraveled in shocking fashion. The scene was set for drama. Ochoa had rallied back from a tough start to put herself in contention on the final hole. A playoff was within reach, until the 18th hole stood between her and a chance at history, a par 5 that demanded precision off the tee to clear the lake and find the fairway. But golf can be merciless, and on this day, it was downright cruel. Standing on the tee, Ochoa knew exactly what she needed to do, but at the worst possible time, her driver betrayed her. The club struck the ground before the ball, sending it skimming across the water like a skipping stone before sinking to the depths. The crowd gasped, but the nightmare wasn't over. Her second drive found the rough, and her approach shot sailed into the grandstands. By the time she finally holed out, the scoreboard told the story. A quadruple bogey 8. From the edge of a playoff to a tie for 6th, her hopes of glory were drowned on the 18th. Ochoa's final words after the round: "I should have done better." For a player of her caliber, it was a heartbreaking end to what could have been a career-defining moment. Now at number 9, think you've had a rough day? Let me tell you about Michelle Wie's unbelievable Saturday at the 2008 State Farm Classic. But before we move on, real quick, I just want to say thanks for watching and supporting the channel. I've got a big goal, 20,000 subscribers by my birthday in March. If you're enjoying this content, subscribing would be the best birthday gift. Alright, Michelle Wie. She wasn't just playing well, she was on fire. And then, in one devastating moment, everything fell apart. Here's the setup. Wie had just shot a stunning 67 in her 3rd round, climbing into 2nd place and putting herself in prime position to chase down Yani Tseng, the tournament leader. She was 1 stroke back, with all the momentum heading into the final round. The crowd was buzzing, the media was ready to declare her back, and it felt like Wie's moment to shine. But golf, as we know, can be cruel, and this collapse didn't happen on the course. It happened off of it. After finishing her 2nd round, Wie made a mistake that no pro ever wants to make. She forgot to sign her scorecard. Simple, right? A quick signature, and she's off to prepare for the next day. But here's the catch. By the time anyone realized the error, it was too late. Rule 6-6B of the USGA rulebook is unflinching. Once a player leaves the designated scoring area without signing their card, the score becomes official, and any corrections are invalid. The worst part? She didn't find out until after her brilliant 3rd round. That 67, her ticket to Sunday contention, didn't matter. Instead of competing for the title, Wie was handed a disqualification. Just like that, her tournament was over. So let's keep going. Here we are at number 8, and this one takes us to the historic fairways of St. Andrews, the home of golf. The stakes couldn't have been higher. World number 1, Nelly was on the verge of cementing her legacy. chasing her second major of the year with a 2-shot lead and just 5 holes to play. But then, everything changed. It all began on the par 5 14th, a hole that had been yielding birdies all week. Korda's drive was solid, and everything seemed under control. But her 4th shot, a tricky pitch, failed to clear the steep bank guarding the green. The ball rolled agonizingly back, leaving her with an awkward 5th shot. Another misstep followed, and by the time she finally holed out, she had carded a double bogey 7. Her lead was gone in an instant. The cracks started to widen. On the iconic road hole, the infamous 17th disaster struck again. Korda's tee shot found the dreaded road hole bunker, a trap that has humbled legends for over a century. Her first attempt to escape? A misfire. The second, barely better. By the time she tapped in for bogey, the writing was on the wall. Meanwhile, Lydia Ko was the picture of composure. As Korda struggled, Ko quietly played steady, confident golf. A birdie at the 18th sealed her victory at 7 under par, and with it, the major title. For Korda, it was a bitter pill to swallow, from a position of control to watching her chance at glory slip away. Moving on to number 7, we revisit one of the most shocking back nine collapses in recent golf history. Minjee Lee's final round at the 2024 U.S. Women's Open wasn't just a bad day at the office. It was a heartbreaker for the ages. Let me set the scene for you. You're Minjee Lee, a 2-time major champion and one of the game's brightest stars. Heading into Sunday at Lancaster Country Club, you're tied for the lead, and by the 7th hole, you've built a 3-shot cushion. The trophy is practically in your grasp, and everything seems to be falling into place. But golf is never that predictable. The cracks started to show on the 10th hole. A wayward drive, an errant approach shot, and suddenly, a comfortable par turns into a frustrating bogey. No big deal, right? Except, it wasn't just one mistake. It was the beginning of a spiral. Bogeys started piling up, each one chipping away at her lead. By the time she reached the 14th hole, her once commanding cushion had vanished. And then came the par 3 16th, a hole that will likely haunt her forever. A mishit tee shot, a disastrous chip. And before she knew it, she was writing down a double bogey. Her final score? A shocking 78. 7 strokes worse than Yuka Saso, who played with surgical precision to clinch her second U.S. Women's Open title. One moment, you're cruising to victory. The next, you're barely in the top 10. Coming in at number 6, we witness perhaps the most gut-wrenching 2 feat in women's golf history. Lexi Thompson's 2017 collapse at the CME Group Tour Championship isn't just a story about missing a short putt. It's about watching a whole season's worth of achievements slip away in seconds. Let me paint you a picture that'll make any golfer cringe. You're Lexi Thompson. You've had an emotional roller coaster of a year, including that controversial penalty at the ANA Inspiration that cost you a major title. But here you are standing over a 2-foot putt on the final hole of the season's last tournament. Make it, and you're not just the player of the year, you'll become the world number 1. Plus an extra $500,000 in prize money. Miss it. Well, nobody's thinking about missing it because it's 2 feet, but sometimes golf can be unbelievably cruel. The gallery was silent. The trophy was practically being engraved. Then, in a moment that seemed to unfold in slow motion, Thompson's putter moved forward. The ball started on line, then, inexplicably, lipped out. The collective gasp from the crowd said it all. What makes this collapse even more dramatic? This wasn't just any tournament. This was the culmination of a season where Thompson had shown incredible resilience. After being hit with that 4-stroke penalty at the ANA Inspiration for a violation that a TV viewer spotted and reported, she'd bounced back to win twice and rack up multiple second-place finishes. Despite the devastating missed putt, Thompson still walked away with the Vare Trophy for the season's lowest scoring average and a $1 million bonus for winning the race to CME Globe. In the end, as you see, everything turns out fine, I guess. It's time for number 5 on our list. And Lorena Ochoa's stunning collapse at the 2007 Gin Tribute, hosted by Annika, might be one of the most shocking mental errors in golf history. Heading into the back 9 of the final round, Ochoa, then the world's top-ranked female golfer, held a 3-stroke lead. Victory seemed inevitable. But the back 9 had other plans. Ochoa's struggles began on the 15th hole, where a misjudged approach shot led to a bogey. By the time she reached the 18th, her lead had dwindled to just 1 shot. Nicole Castrale, steady and composed, was waiting to pounce. Then came the first playoff hole and the unthinkable happened. Ochoa stepped up to the tee, and her drive veered left, straight into a hazard. The misstep was devastating. While Ochoa struggled to recover, Castrale stayed composed, finding the fairway and setting herself up for a routine par. When the final putt dropped, it was Castrale claiming her first LPGA title, leaving Ochoa to wonder how a tournament she had controlled for so long slipped through her fingers. And now at number 4, we have a moment so shocking. It left fans around the world absolutely speechless. Nelly Korda, world number 1, the face of women's golf, and a player known for her calm under pressure, suffered a meltdown at the 2024 KPMG Women's PGA Championship that no one saw coming. Let's rewind. Korda entered the year riding high, having finally claimed her first major championship. She looked unstoppable, the kind of player who could contend every single week. But heading into Sahalee, the cracks were already starting to show. 2 missed cuts in her last 2 starts had raised some eyebrows. Still, this was Nelly Korda. Surely, she'd bounce back on a stage as big as the Women's PGA, right? Not quite. Her first round was shaky but salvageable, a 3 over par 75 that kept her within reach of the cut line. But Friday? Friday was an entirely different story. From the moment she teed off, it was clear something was off. Bogeys piled up like a slow-moving train wreck, 8 in total by the time she reached the clubhouse. And the par 5 11th? A disastrous double bogey sealed her fate. The final scorecard? A jaw-dropping 81, leaving her at 9 over par and miles outside the cut line. For a player of Korda's caliber, it was nothing short of stunning. What makes this moment so memorable isn't just the numbers, it's the context. This was her 3rd consecutive missed cut, a shocking downturn for someone who had been the best player in the world just months earlier. To go from the heights of major glory to this kind of struggle left fans and commentators alike wondering, what happened to Nelly Korda? Yes, you've made it to our top 3, and here we're taking you to the 1990 US Women's Open, where Patty Sheehan delivered one of the most unbelievable meltdowns in golf history. This wasn't just a loss, it was a masterpiece of heartbreak on the biggest stage. All right, let's set the scene. Patty Sheehan was at the height of her powers, the world's top-ranked player, with 23 LPGA Tour wins under her belt. She arrived at Atlanta Athletic Club's Riverside course and immediately started dismantling the field. By the end of the 3rd round, Sheehan had a commanding 11-shot lead. 11. That's not a lead, that's a canyon. To put this in perspective, in the previous 60 years of US Open history, nobody had ever lost a lead that big in the final round. Well, somebody had to be first, right? The collapse started subtly, almost too quietly. A missed fairway here, an awkward chip there. Still, Sheehan seemed to have plenty of room for error. That was until she reached the back 9. Suddenly, her game went into free fall. Fatigue and dehydration kicked in, and the invincible Patty Sheehan started looking vulnerable. By the 11th hole, defending champion Betsy King had erased the gap. King, calm and relentless, played like someone who knew how to win on this stage. Meanwhile, Sheehan couldn't stop the bleeding. The bogeys piled up and her once massive lead evaporated into thin air. Then came the 18th hole. She needed a birdie to force a playoff, and Sheehan found herself standing over a putt that would define her tournament. The gallery was silent. The tension was unbearable. And then, the ball missed. Just like that, the dream was over. Sliding into number 2. Imagine this. IK Kim is standing on the 18th green at the Kraft Nabisco Championship. She's 1 stroke ahead of the leader in the clubhouse and 2 strokes clear of the only remaining challenger on the course. The trophy is practically hers. All that stands between Kim and her first major championship is a putt so short it's almost insulting. This is supposed to be the moment of celebration. The crowd goes silent as IK Kim steps up to the ball. 1 foot, that's all. It's the kind of putt you'd make 99 times out of 100 without even thinking about it. But this isn't practice. This is a major championship, and the pressure is suffocating. She strokes the ball, and it misses. Not just barely. It doesn't even touch the hole. The gallery gasps. Kim looks as though she's been struck by lightning. With the miss, she's forced into a playoff with Sun Young Yu, and the writing is already on the wall. The playoff begins, but Kim is still reeling. On the first hole, Yu stays ice cold, draining a clutch birdie putt while Kim falters. It's over. What was supposed to be Kim's crowning moment has transformed into one of the most devastating collapses in golf history. And finally, the big number one, the Queen of Meltdowns. Here's Lexi Thompson's 2021 US Women's Open collapse, a meltdown so spectacular it actually helped create one of golf's biggest stars. But first, it had to break her. Thompson had been in control all week at the Olympic Club. She started her final round with a near eagle on the very first hole, missing by just 6 feet, and tapped in for birdie. By the time she hit the middle of the front nine, she had built a commanding 5-shot lead. The victory lap seemed inevitable. But then, the cracks began to show. From the outside, Thompson looked steady, but golf analyst Brandel Chambly noticed something troubling. After watching her narrowly miss that eagle putt on the first hole, he remarked, "She missed the center of her putter face by half an inch. I've never seen a professional golfer miss the center of the putter by a wider margin." It was a subtle misstep, but in the high-stakes world of major championship golf, small cracks can quickly become gaping holes. And that's exactly what happened. The back nine became a nightmare. Bogeys crept onto her scorecard, and the once dominant lead began to evaporate. The relentless challenge of the Olympic Club, combined with the mounting pressure of chasing her first US Women's Open title, seemed to unravel her game. As the round wore on, you could feel the tension rising shot by shot. By the time she reached the 18th hole, Thompson's lead was gone. She needed a par putt to force a playoff and keep her hopes alive. The moment was hers for the taking, one last chance to salvage victory. But under the crushing weight of the moment, the putt slid agonizingly past the hole. The bogey sealed her fate. A 5/41 on the back nine left her one stroke short of the playoff. Walking off the green, Thompson offered a brave smile and hugs to her fellow competitors, but the heartbreak was undeniable. Looking back, that missed eagle putt on the first hole feels like a harbinger of the unraveling to come. A moment that symbolized how the smallest missteps can snowball into disaster in the unforgiving game of golf. But wait, we're not done yet. What if I told you that 10 of the worst chokes in women's golf were just the beginning? And trust me, these next moments only get worse. This is Dustin Johnson at the 2017 WGC HSBC Champions. Imagine this. You're the world #1 golfer, riding high with a 6-shot lead heading into Sunday. You're on the verge of golf history, poised to become the first player ever to win 3 World Golf Championships in a single year. The trophy? Practically within arm's reach. But then, the worst thing that can happen becomes reality. For 54 holes, Dustin Johnson was untouchable. But on this fateful Sunday, he made not a single birdie. The best player in the world at the time couldn't make one birdie when it mattered most. But that's not all. While DJ was self-destructing with 5 bogeys, Justin Rose was putting together the round of his life. Starting 8 shots behind Johnson, Rose probably didn't even consider himself a contender. Who would? He only realized he was in contention when he glanced at a leaderboard behind the 14th green and saw he was just 3 shots back. Suddenly, it was game on. While DJ's round spiraled into chaos with 5 bogeys and a slew of missed opportunities, Rose stayed ice cold. His 5 under 67 was nothing short of clinical, a masterclass in seizing the moment when the door cracks open. And then came the finale. Standing on the 18th tee, Dustin Johnson still had an outside chance. An eagle could salvage something, anything, from the wreckage of his round. But fate had other plans. His approach found the water, a fittingly cruel end to a day where everything seemed to go wrong. His closing 77 was not just a stumble. It was a total collapse. By the end of it all, the leaderboard told the story. Rose at the top, DJ nowhere to be found. Number 19 takes us to San Francisco, 2005. John Daly versus Tiger Woods at the WGC American Express Championship. A classic David versus Goliath story. Except this time, David tripped over his own slingshot. The tension at Harding Park Golf Club was electric as these two legends found themselves deadlocked at 10 under par 270 after 4 days of incredible golf. And now, it all came down to this: a sudden death playoff. Tiger had been here before, a playoff assassin who thrived under the spotlight. Daly, on the other hand, was the wild card, a man who played with a mix of fearless confidence and unpredictable chaos. As they walked to the first playoff tee, the crowd held its breath. Would Daly pull off one of the biggest upsets of the decade? Or would Tiger once again prove why he was untouchable when the pressure was at its peak? The first playoff hole wasn't enough to separate them. But then, on the second hole, Daly faced a moment that would haunt him for years. He stood over a 3-foot putt to extend the playoff, just 3 feet between him and a chance to keep the dream alive. And he missed. The crowd fell silent, and Daly's face said it all: shock, disbelief, and heartbreak. Meanwhile, Tiger calmly tapped in for par, adding yet another trophy to his overflowing collection. Let's talk about number 18, and one of the most excruciating moments ever witnessed at Augusta National. It's 1978, and the Masters is coming down to a dramatic finish. Gary Player had already put on a show, firing an incredible final round 64 to take the clubhouse lead. But all eyes were on Hubert Green, still out on the course, methodically closing in on the chance to force a playoff. As Green approached the 18th green, the tension was palpable. His second shot? Perfect. The kind of approach you dream about, landing 3 feet from the cup. The gallery roared. It was all there for him. A short putt to keep the Masters alive, but in golf, nothing is ever that simple. As Green stood over the putt, the worst thing that could happen happened. Out of nowhere, a radio announcer's voice cut through the still Augusta air like a knife. The interruption shattered the silence and Green's focus. He stepped back, took a deep breath, and then pushed it right. Just like that, a green jacket slipped through his fingers and Player claimed his third Masters title. The moral of the story? Sometimes the shortest putts leave the longest scars. And at Augusta National, even the smallest distractions can write themselves into golf history. Coming in at number 17, which should probably rank even lower on the list of the worst chokes. It's so brutal, it's almost unimaginable. This one brings us to Robert Garrigus at the 2010 FedEx St. Jude Classic at TPC Southwind. And oh boy, this one is wild. A 3-shot lead, 1 hole to play, and a chance to secure his first ever PGA Tour victory. You literally just have to keep your ball on planet Earth to win. The 18th hole was playing as a straightforward par 4. All he needed was a boring par or even a bogey. Heck, he could have made a double bogey and still won the tournament. Instead, Garrigus decided to give us all a masterclass in how to throw away a tournament. Water off the tee? Check. Trees with the next shot? You bet. After taking a penalty drop, he made the puzzling decision to go for the green instead of laying up, and his ball found the trees. By the time he punched out to the fairway, hit his 5th shot onto the green and 2-putted for a triple bogey 7, that 3-shot lead had completely disappeared. But wait, if you think it couldn't get worse, you're wrong. In the sudden death playoff against Lee Westwood and Robert Carlson, he managed to find a tree again on the very first extra hole, because apparently the first time wasn't painful enough to watch. His tee shot left him no shot at the green, leading to a bogey and elimination from the playoff. Westwood would go on to claim victory 4 holes later, while Garrigus was left to wonder how a seemingly certain victory turned into one of golf's most spectacular collapses. Number 16. Bryson DeChambeau, 2018 European Open. Now, we all know Bryson as the mad scientist of golf, but this collapse was more mad than science. Playing alongside Richard McEvoy in the final group, DeChambeau had everything going for him. He was leading by 1 shot with 3 par 5s in the final 4 holes. It was practically gift-wrapped for him. With his legendary length off the tee and analytical approach to the game, these scoring holes were tailor-made for him to dominate. However, what followed was a meltdown that even science couldn't explain. DeChambeau's precision game completely abandoned him as he went bogey, bogey, par, triple bogey. That's a cry for help. His frustration boiled over on the 15th hole when he sent his ball swimming, and by the time he reached the 18th, Bryson was in full implosion mode. 2 balls dunked into the water turned what could have been a triumphant birdie into a gut-wrenching triple bogey, 8. His final round 78 was the stuff of nightmares, plummeting him from a shot at victory to a tie for 13th place. But the worst was yet to come. While McEvoy was celebrating his first European Tour victory after 285 starts and 17 years of trying, DeChambeau barely acknowledged the champion. His handshake with McEvoy was colder than a Scottish winter, a brief, dismissive gesture that drew immediate criticism from fans and fellow players alike. Here was McEvoy, finally getting his breakthrough win after nearly 2 decades of grinding. And DeChambeau couldn't even muster basic sportsmanship. Not exactly the behavior you'd expect from someone who prides himself on being golf's intellectual ambassador. Speaking of pressure situations, number 15 takes us to the 1991 Ryder Cup and Mark Calcavecchia's meltdown that still gives golf fans nightmares. This wasn't just any Ryder Cup. This was the infamous War on the Shore at Kiowa Island's Ocean Course, where tension was already at an all-time high. Team USA hadn't won the cup in their last 3 attempts, and the pressure was mounting to bring it back home. So what happened? Enter Calcavecchia's singles match against Colin Montgomery. 4 up with 4 to play. You cannot lose from there. It's literally impossible. The American just needed to win or have any of the remaining holes to win the cup for his country. Well, Calc found a way to make the impossible possible, and what followed was horrible. The collapse started gradually, then picked up speed like an avalanche. 1 hole lost, then another, and yet another. By the time they reached the par 3 17th, Calc's game had completely deserted him. The lowlight? A near shank into the water on 17 when Monty had already dunked his ball, a golden opportunity squandered. And then came the coup de grace, missing a 2-footer for double bogey that would have won the cup for America. It never even touched the hole. The mental torture was so severe that after having the match, Calcavecchia literally walked away from the 18th green, down to the beach, and collapsed into the sand, sobbing uncontrollably. Now, we're at number 14, and this one is special because it features none other than the seemingly untouchable Tiger Woods. By 2009, Tiger wasn't just the best closer in golf, he was the best closer ever. Leading after 3 rounds at the PGA Championship, he'd done this 14 times before in majors, and won every single one. To the golf world, it was a foregone conclusion. Tiger didn't lose leads, period. But the 2009 PGA Championship wasn't just another chapter in Tiger's storybook career. It became the scene of one of his most shocking collapses, thanks to an unlikely challenger, Y.E. Yang, ranked 110th in the world. A player no one expected to contend, let alone go toe-to-toe with Tiger on Sunday. Yang didn't flinch, he didn't crumble. In fact, he played the round of his life. The pivotal moment came on the par 4 14th, where Yang delivered a thunderbolt of a chip-in for eagle, instantly seizing the momentum. The crowd was stunned, and, for the first time in a major, Tiger looked vulnerable. On the 18th, with everything on the line, Yang cemented his place in history. A towering approach shot soared over a tree and landed within 10 feet of the hole. A shot so audacious, so perfect, it left even Tiger shaking his head. As Yang holed the birdie putt, the absolute unthinkable happened. Tiger Woods, the greatest closer in golf history, choked. It was like watching Superman discover kryptonite for the first time, and the golf world would never look at Tiger quite the same way again. Coming in at unlucky number 13, which brings us Ed Sneed at the 1979 Masters. After maintaining a comfortable lead throughout most of the tournament and beginning the final round with a 5-stroke advantage, Sneed looked destined to slip on his first green jacket. With just 3 holes to play, he still held a 3-shot lead. Simple math says you can bogey every hole and still win, right? Well, that's exactly what Sneed did, and incredibly, it wasn't enough. What followed was one of the most agonizing finishes in Masters history. 3 straight bogeys, each one more painful than the last. On the 16th, his par putt caught the edge and spun out. On 17, same story. The ball teased the hole before refusing to drop. It was as if the golf gods were playing a cruel joke, watching those putts dance around the cup before staying out, like they were toying with Sneed's dreams. By the time he reached the 18th hole, you could see the weight of the moment crushing him. His final par putt to win the Masters stopped just inches from glory. The playoff loss to Fuzzy Zoeller that followed was just the final twist of the knife. Fuzzy becoming the first rookie to win the Masters since Gene Sarazen in 1935. Some say you can still hear Sneed's sighs echoing through the Augusta pines. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating, but it really is a wake-up call to remember that in golf, no lead is ever truly safe, even when simple math tells you otherwise. Next up, number 12. We're with Martin Kaymer at the 2015 Abu Dhabi Championship. And this one starts like a fairy tale, but ends like an absolute horror story. So, let me explain. First, you need to know that Kaymer wasn't just any player. He was a 2-time major champion, former world number 1, and known as one of the most reliable closers in golf. In other words, he was a guy with experience. So, when he birdied 3 of his first 4 holes to lead by 10 shots, nobody batted an eye in the Abu Dhabi Championship. At that point, you could relax and play the rest of the round with a beer on the other hand and still win from there. But golf, as we know, has a cruel sense of humor. What unfolded next was one of the most inexplicable collapses in recent golf history. Kaymer's precision game mysteriously abandoned him as he played the remaining holes 6 over par. Meanwhile, Gary Stahl, ranked 357th in the world and a complete unknown, surged through the field, carting a bogey-free 65 to put himself in contention. By the time the final few holes came around, Kaymer's 10-shot cushion had evaporated. On the par 4 13th, he triple bogeyed after an errant approach and a nightmare 3-putt. That was the tipping point. The moment the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. His precision, his poise, his reputation as an unshakable closer, it all unraveled, like he forgot how to play golf or something. In the end, Gary Stahl claimed an improbable victory while Kaymer finished a staggering 3 shots back. Alright, on to the next. Number 11 takes us back to the 1989 nightmare of Augusta National. Scott Hoke had the green jacket within his grasp during a playoff against Nick Faldo on the treacherous 10th hole. With Faldo stumbling to a bogey, the door was wide open for Hoke. 2 putts from 30 feet would secure his first major championship. Simple enough, right? Not at Augusta. Hoke's first putt wasn't ideal, leaving him just under 3 feet for the win. But it was that second putt, less than 3 feet, that turned into one of golf's most infamous moments. The pressure of potentially winning the Masters seemed to freeze him in place. He studied the putt for what felt like an eternity, circling it from every angle like he was analyzing a masterpiece. Front, back, side to side. If drones existed then, he might have gotten an aerial view. The longer he stood over it, the more daunting that 3-footer became. Finally, he took the stroke. And in the cruelest twist of fate, Scott made the ultimate pressure mistake. He both played for break and hit it too firmly. The ball blasted past the hole, rolling 5 feet beyond. Though he composed himself enough to drain the comebacker and extend the playoff, the damage was done. His confidence had evaporated. On the next hole, sensing the moment, Faldo struck like a shark smelling blood in the water. He buried a 25-foot birdie putt, clinching the victory and leaving Scott as yet another tragic what if at Augusta. You're halfway through at number 10. Here we're with Doug Sanders at the 1970 Open Championship. This was a man who had won 20 times on the PGA Tour, known as much for his flashy wardrobe as his talent. But for all his success, Sanders had never captured a major championship. And now, on the 18th green at St. Andrews, the home of golf, he was 3 feet away from changing that forever. It wasn't just any 3-footer. This was to defeat Jack Nicklaus, the Golden Bear himself, and claim the claret jug. His first putt from 30 feet above the hole had been perfect, leaving what should have been a simple tap-in for glory. But then, as he addressed the ball, Sanders noticed something in his line. A speck of dirt? A tuft of brown grass? Whatever it was, it threw him off. Instead of stepping back to reset, Sanders awkwardly bent down to remove it without moving his feet, a break in concentration at the worst possible moment. He rushed the stroke, and the ball slid past the right edge. The sight of Sanders lunging forward, as if trying to pull the ball back into the hole with his body, became one of golf's most haunting images. He lost to Nicklaus in the playoff the next day, and that 3-footer would haunt him for the rest of his career. He never won a major championship. Number 9 takes us to a moment as heartbreaking as it is unforgettable: Rory McIlroy's collapse at the 2024 US Open. After 10 long years without a major, this was supposed to be his redemption. 2 shots clear with 4 to play at Pinehurst number 2, the same course where Payne Stewart had famously won in 1999. The stars seemed aligned. McIlroy was playing brilliant golf, and the galleries were willing him toward victory, desperate to see him claim his first major since 2014. But golf, as always, had other plans. The unraveling began at the par 3 15th, where McIlroy missed the green and couldn't save par. His lead shrank to 1. Then came the 16th, a par 4 he should have handled with ease. Instead, a sloppy approach left him scrambling, and he shockingly missed a 2-foot putt for par, a brutal mistake that left him visibly rattled. The 17th brought brief hope as Rory steadied himself with a crucial par save, but the damage wasn't done yet. On the 18th, with the championship still within his grasp, McIlroy's nerves betrayed him again. A 3-foot putt for par lipped out, sealing his fate with a third bogey in the final 4 holes. Bryson DeChambeau, steady under pressure, took the title by a single stroke. The collapse was so devastating that McIlroy, one of golf's most media-friendly stars who always faces the music no matter how difficult the situation, skipped the post-round interviews. In the aftermath, McIlroy called it probably the toughest experience of his 17-year career, and announced he needed time away from golf to recover. Even Sir Nick Faldo, who knows a thing or two about major championship pressure, suggested this collapse could haunt Rory for years to come. Counting down to number 8. This one shows us that even the smallest mistakes can have massive consequences. Here's the story of Hale Irwin at the 1983 British Open. This wasn't a collapse in the traditional sense. It was more like a brain freeze of epic proportions, and it came out of nowhere during the 3rd round at Royal Birkdale. Irwin was in contention, playing solid golf, when he faced a 20-foot birdie putt at the 14th hole. After missing the birdie attempt, he did what he'd done thousands of times before, walked up to tap in the remaining few inches. Pure routine, something pros do in their sleep. But in a moment, that still makes golfers cringe 40 years later. Irwin casually went to tap it in, and completely whiffed, missed the ball entirely. The gallery gasped. His playing partners stood in shocked silence. It was like watching a master chef forget how to boil water. The error was so bizarre that it took everyone a moment to process what had happened. That casual swipe of frustration, that momentary lapse in concentration, ended up costing him dearly. He lost the tournament by a single shot to Tom Watson. It's the golf equivalent of tripping over your own feet at the finish line. For a 3-time US Open champion and one of the game's most meticulous players, it was a humble reminder that golf can break even the greatest players in the most mundane moments. And now we're at lucky number 7, featuring a not-so-lucky Sergio Garcia at the 2005 Wachovia Championship. With a 6-shot lead heading into the final round at Quail Hollow, Sergio had this one in the bag, right? The swaggering Spaniard, known for his incredible ball striking, had been playing beautifully all week. This was supposed to be another stepping stone in his ascent to greatness. Even the typically cautious golf commentators were ready to engrave his name on the trophy. But from the moment he stepped onto the first tee, everything changed. His normally precise ball striking, usually as reliable as a Swiss watch, suddenly abandoned him. On the par 5 7th, an errant drive sent him scrambling, leading to a double bogey that sliced his lead nearly in half. Then came the par 4 12th, where he shockingly 3-putted from just 15 feet. A devastating bogey that left him visibly deflated. Every hole seemed to bring a new disaster, and his confidence left the chat. As Garcia's game crumbled, Vijay Singh, the relentless competitor he was, swooped in like a shark sensing blood in the water. The 6-shot cushion vanished into thin air, and with it went Garcia's chance at victory. Making it even more painful, this collapse would join the infamous company of players who had lost 6-shot leads, putting Sergio's name alongside Greg Norman's legendary Masters meltdown. The young Spaniard was left standing on the 18th green, hands on hips, wondering what hurricane had just hit him, while Singh celebrated another comeback victory. Here we are at number 6, which features Matt Gogle at the 2000 Pebble Beach Pro-Am. 7 shots, 7 holes, a seemingly insurmountable lead. Sounds safe, doesn't it? Well, not if Tiger is the competitor. This was Tiger in his prime, the year 2000, when he would go on to win 9 tournaments, including 3 majors. And Matt Gogle, a PGA Tour rookie, was living every golfer's dream. But he picked the absolute worst day to fall apart. What unfolded over those final 7 holes was like watching a nature documentary where the predator slowly stalks its prey. Tiger, sensing weakness, pounced with an eagle at the 15th, while Gogle's game began to unravel under the mounting pressure. On the 16th, a missed green led to a bogey, while Tiger added another birdie. Suddenly, the lead was down to just 1. By the time they reached the final hole, the inevitability of the moment hung in the Pacific air. The crowd knew what was coming. They'd seen this movie before. Tiger's eyes had that familiar intensity, while Gogle looked like a man trying to hold water in his hands. This wasn't just a collapse. It was a combination of Gogle's meltdown and Tiger's legendary fighting spirit. When Woods finally sealed the deal with a birdie at the last hole, completing a round of 64, It felt both shocking and somehow inevitable. The 7-shot comeback remained the largest of Tiger's PGA Tour career, and it talks about both his brilliance and Gogle's unfortunate place in history. Yes, you've made it to our top 5, and this collapse is so unbelievable, it feels almost impossible. Enter Kyle Stanley at the 2012 Farmers Insurance Open at Torrey Pines. A 3-shot lead on the final hole, on a par 5 no less. How do you possibly give that away? Impossible, right? Yet somehow the unthinkable happened. Stanley had been flawless all week, even holding a 6-shot lead with 9 holes to play. Now, standing on the 18th tee, he just needed to avoid disaster. He played it smart too, laying up to a perfect yardage of 77 yards, rather than risking the water by going for the green in 2. Smart, right? Well, that was what we thought, but things don't always turn out the way we want. His seemingly routine wedge shot landed on the green, but then spun back viciously like it was being pulled by some invisible force. Splash. The ball disappeared into the water. Still, even after the penalty drop, Stanley had 2 putts from 45 feet to win the tournament. But the nightmare wasn't over. He ran his first putt 4 feet past and then missed the comeback. Triple bogey 8. In a matter of minutes, he'd gone from 3 shots ahead to forcing a playoff with Brandt Snedeker, which he would ultimately lose. An emotional Stanley said afterward that he will be back, fighting back tears during his post-round interview. Few believed those words in the moment. How do you come back from something like that? But here's the incredible silver lining. Stanley didn't just come back. He won the very next week at the Waste Management Phoenix Open. Number 4 takes us way back to Sam Sneed in 1947. The US Open was Sneed's white whale, the one trophy that always eluded him despite being one of the greatest golfers ever. We're talking about Slammin' Sammy here, a man who would go on to win a record 82 PGA Tour events, 7 majors, and was famous for having the most beautiful swing in golf history. But the US Open, that tournament seemed to have a personal vendetta against him. The 1947 heartbreak at St. Louis Country Club was the cruelest of them all. Sneed was in a playoff with Lou Worsham. He faces a mere 2.5-footer to extend the playoff. A putt so short that Sneed could probably have made it with his eyes closed on any other day. But this was the US Open, and these weren't just any 2.5 feet. They were the longest 30 inches in golf history. The ball slid past the hole, and with it went another chance at the trophy he coveted most. Back in 1939, he failed too. It's like the US Open had some kind of curse on Slammin' Sammy. 4 times he finished second, but never got to lift that trophy. The tournament that should have been his masterpiece became his nemesis. And here we are at number 3, featuring what might be the most disastrous bunker play at the worst possible moment. This is Thomas Bjorn at the 2003 British Open at Royal St. George's. 3 shots ahead with 4 to play, the stoic Dane was on the verge of capturing his first major championship. He had played brilliant golf all week, mastering the quirky bounces and brutal winds of links golf. Even better, he was about to become the first Danish player to win a major championship. The claret jug was practically engraved with his name. Then came the par 3 16th hole and that bunker. A seemingly routine greenside sand shot turned into the stuff of nightmares. Bjorn's ball found the steep face of the trap, and the downfall started. His first attempt caught the steep slope and rolled back to his feet. The gallery groaned. No problem, he thought. Just try again. But the second attempt? Same result. The ball trickled back down the slope like it was drawn by a magnet, settling mockingly at Bjorn's feet. By the time he finally escaped on his third attempt, making double bogey, his 3-shot lead had vanished into the English seaside air. He would bogey the 17th as well, completing the collapse. Meanwhile, Ben Curtis, ranked 396th in the world and playing in his very first major championship, became the most unlikely champion in Open history. The American was so convinced he wouldn't win that he had already booked a flight home before the leaders finished. Number 2 takes us back, yes again, to the infamous War on the Shore at Kiawah Island in 1991, one of the most gut-wrenching Ryder Cup finales in history. You're probably thinking, wait, didn't we already cover this one? True, but what if I told you there was another collapse layered on top of the Americans' near heartbreaking disaster? That's right, one dramatic implosion wasn't enough for this Ryder Cup. The entire week had been a pressure cooker of tension, controversy, and drama, but nothing compared to the final moments. a showdown that delivered heartbreak on both sides before the dust settled. It wasn't just Bernhard Langer who faced immense pressure that day. Earlier, Mark Calcavecchia endured his own collapse for Team USA. 4 up with 4 to play against Colin Montgomery, Calcavecchia crumbled, losing hole after hole and missing a 2-footer on the 17th that could have sealed the match. Instead, he halved it, walking off with tears in his eyes, thinking he had thrown it all away. Enter Bernhard Langer, Europe's anchor and one of the most dependable players of his generation. Langer had a 6-foot putt on the final hole of the final match to retain the cup for Europe. But this wasn't just any 6-footer. It was the 6-footer, the kind of putt that could make or break legacies. Langer had a long history with the putting yips, a career-long battle that had seen him switch to a long putter and experiment with various grips just to keep his career alive. Now, here he was, facing the putt of his life. The silence around the green was deafening. His teammates watched helplessly. The Americans held their breath. The ball started on line but slid agonizingly by the right edge. The Americans erupted in celebration, while Langer stood there, hands on his head, the weight of European hopes crushed in an instant. The war on the shore had its dramatic conclusion, and it couldn't have been more heartbreaking for the Europeans. And finally, number 1, Arnold Palmer, 1966 US Open at the Olympic Club in San Francisco. This wasn't just a collapse, this was a complete and utter implosion that still echoes through golf history. Palmer, the king himself, at the height of his powers, with his army of fans following his every move, was on the verge of something special. Leading by 9 shots in the final round, Arnie was about to claim his 2nd US Open title and his 8th major championship overall. But this is where Palmer's legendary aggressive style, the very thing that made him the people's champion, became his undoing. Instead of playing it safe, protecting his massive lead, Arnie kept attacking flags like he was trying to shoot 59. It was classic Palmer, go for broke, give the fans a show. Billy Casper, meanwhile, played with the precision of a surgeon, methodically dissecting the course while Palmer self-destructed. It was so painful to watch. At the par 5 13th, a bogey started to chip away at his cushion. Then came the par 4 15th, where a careless 3-putt bogey brought Casper even closer. By the 16th, a disastrous double bogey wiped out the last of his lead, and Casper had caught him. Palmer's 9-shot advantage was gone. The next day's 18-hole playoff wasn't even close. Casper, steady as ever, won by 4 shots, claiming his 2nd US Open title. For Palmer, this wasn't just a loss, it was a turning point. He would never win another major championship, and the collapse became a shadow that followed him for the rest of his life. But wait, we're not done yet. I've got one more surprise for you, because we couldn't end this list without mentioning the absolute worst chokes of all. So here it is, the bonus moment. It's the 1999 Open at Carnoustie, and Van de Velde is leading by 3 shots going to the final hole. He just needs a double bogey 6 to become the first French winner of the Open since 1907. That's right, he could take twice the number of shots par requires and still win. What could possibly go wrong? Well, everything. Absolutely everything. First, instead of playing it safe with an iron off the tee, Van de Velde pulls out his driver. Why? Nobody knows. His tee shot barely cleared the berry burn and ends up in the rough. Okay, not ideal, but still no problem, right? Just lay up, wedge it on, 2-putt for your double bogey and collect the claret jug. But no, that would be too simple. Instead, Van de Velde decides to go for the green with a 2-iron. The ball hits the grandstand railing, bounces off a stone wall, and ends up in thick rough. Still technically salvageable, but then he chunks his next shot right into the berry burn. And this is where things get truly bizarre. Van de Velde, now clearly having lost all sense of reality, takes off his shoes and socks, rolls up his pants, and wades into the water. He's actually considering hitting the ball out of the burn. The entire golf world is watching this French golfer strip down on live TV, standing ankle-deep in Scottish Creek water, contemplating what would surely be the most ill-advised shot in golf history. Thankfully, after what feels like an eternity, he comes to his senses and takes a drop. But by now, the damage is done. He makes a triple bogey 7, falling into a 3-way playoff, which he ultimately loses to Paul Lorry. So, what should have been a historic victory for French golf turned into one of the sport's most infamous disasters ever. Yes, you've made it this far. You've seen the brutal ones, the unexpected ones, but these are the ones no golfer ever forgets. We've saved the best, or worst, for last. Imagine this. You're leading a major championship with just one hole to play, just one par away from making history. Then, in a split second, everything changes. That's exactly what happened to Chile's Mito Pereira at the 2022 PGA Championship. And let me tell you, this wasn't just any collapse. This was watching someone's dreams evaporate in real time. Here's what makes this so wild. Pereira wasn't even supposed to be in this position. He was ranked 100th in the world, playing in only his second major championship ever. But for 71 holes, he played like a seasoned veteran. Leading by 3 shots at the start of Sunday, he battled through the pressure like a champion. Until he didn't. The collapse started slowly. Bogeys began to pile up, but he was still hanging on, still leading. Walking to that final tee, he had a one-shot advantage. All he needed was a par on the 72nd hole. Just get the ball in play, make a routine par, and become the first Chilean to ever win a major championship. But golf has a cruel sense of timing. As Pereira stood over his driver, millions watching around the world, you could feel the tension through the TV screen. Then came the swing. His ball took off like it was afraid of heights, diving right and finding the small creek that winds along the hole. Not even in the main hazard, in a tiny creek that most players probably didn't even know existed. But the really heartbreaking part, he didn't just lose the tournament, he didn't even make the playoff. That wayward tee shot led to a double bogey, dropping him from first place to tied for third. Justin Thomas and Will Zalatoris went to a playoff, while Pereira was left to watch from the scoring tent, that blank look on his face telling the whole story. His explanation afterward? I just wanted to put it in play, and I guess I aimed too far right. Sometimes the simplest mistakes hurt the most. He even said in an interview, "I wish I could do it again." Don't we all wish we could sometimes? Moving on to number 9, we witnessed perhaps the most gut-wrenching 2 feat in women's golf history. Lexi Thompson's 2017 collapse at the CME Group Tour Championship isn't just a story about missing a short putt. It's about watching a whole season's worth of achievements slip away in seconds. Let me paint you a picture that'll make any golfer cringe. You're Lexi Thompson. You've had an emotional roller coaster of a year, including that controversial penalty at the ANA Inspiration that cost you a major title. But here you are, standing over a 2-foot putt on the final hole of the season's last tournament. Make it, and you're not just the player of the year. You'll become the world number 1. Plus, an extra $500,000 in prize money. Miss it? Well, nobody's thinking about missing it because it's 2 feet. But sometimes golf can be unbelievably cruel. The gallery was silent. The trophy was practically being engraved. Then, in a moment that seemed to unfold in slow motion, Thompson's putter moved forward. The ball started on line, then, inexplicably, lipped out. The collective gasp from the crowd said it all. What makes this collapse even more dramatic? This wasn't just any tournament. This was the culmination of a season where Thompson had shown incredible resilience. After being hit with that 4-stroke penalty at the ANA Inspiration for a violation that a TV viewer spotted and reported, she'd bounce back to win twice and rack up multiple second-place finishes. Despite the devastating missed putt, Thompson still walked away with the Vare Trophy for the season's lowest scoring average and a $1 million bonus for winning the race to CME Globe. In the end, as you see, everything turns out fine, I guess. Now, on number 8, think you're having a bad day at work? Let me tell you about DJ's Sunday at Whistling Straits. He's leading the PGA Championship on the final hole, 1 par away from his first major title. Then comes the moment that would change everything, and not in a good way. It's the final hole of the PGA Championship. Johnson is leading. The gallery is packed, the tension is thick, and DJ steps up to hit his tee shot. It sails right, way right, into an area where the crowds had been walking all week. No big deal, right? Players hit it into the crowd all the time. But here's where things get crazy. Whistling Straits isn't any typical golf course. It's got bunkers everywhere, more than 1,000 of them. Some aren't even in play. They're just there for looks. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. Even outside the ropes, where the spectators walk. So DJ gets to his ball, sitting on this patch of sand that's been trampled down by thousands of feet all week. In his mind, it's just dirt. The fans are standing in it, crying out loud. He does what any player would do, grounds his club, takes his shot, and continues playing. But there was a local rule that week. Every single sandy area on the course was considered a bunker. whether it looked like one or not. It was written right there on a sheet of paper in the locker room. But who reads those things, right? The real gut punch came after Johnson finished the hole. He thought he had forced his way into a playoff, but instead, officials approached him before he even left the 18th green. 2-stroke penalty. Game over. From playoff to tied for 5th in the blink of an eye. After this, he surely started to read those rule sheets. Next up, number 7, and this one still haunts Phil Mickelson to this day. The 2006 US Open at Winged Foot wasn't just a collapse. It was watching a future Hall of Famer snatch defeat from the jaws of victory in the most Phil Mickelson way possible. Picture this scene. Lefty arrives at the 18th tee with a one-shot lead. The US Open, the one major that had always eluded him, is within grasp. The New York crowd is going wild, ready to witness history. All he needs is a par on the final hole. Just get the ball in the fairway, that's it. But he couldn't resist the temptation to go for broke. Instead of playing it safe with a 4-wood or long iron, he pulls out the driver. What followed was like watching a car crash in slow motion. Driver off the tee, way left. Second shot, hits a tree. Third shot, buried in a bunker. When the dust settled, Mickelson had made double bogey and lost by 1. His words afterward became instantly legendary. "I am such an idiot." Hey, at least he was honest about it. So, let's keep going. Here we are at number 6, where we witness Greg Norman's first dance with Masters heartbreak. The 1986 season was supposed to be the year of the shark. Instead, it became the year of what could have been. That year, Norman did something that no golfer had ever done before or since. He led all 4 majors heading into the final round. They called it the Saturday Slam. But trust me, there was nothing celebratory about it. I will just say it, he only won one of them. At the Masters, standing on the 18th fairway, Norman needed just a par to force a playoff with Nicklaus. He had a perfect angle, a comfortable 4-iron in his hands, and all the talent in the world. The crowd was silent. The moment was his. Then, disaster. His approach shot sailed right, leading to a bogey that would haunt him for years. And this was just the beginning. At the US Open, he forced a playoff with a miraculous 40-foot par putt, running around the green in celebration, only to lose to Fuzzy Zoeller the next day by 8 shots. At the PGA Championship, Bob Tway holed an impossible bunker shot to steal the trophy. Norman would later call that Masters loss his biggest regret. Think about that. Of all the painful defeats in his career, and there were plenty, this one stung the most. Why? Because he knew he had it. One swing. One single swing with a 4-iron standing between him and golfing immortality. It's time for number 5 on our list, and Adam Scott's 2012 Open Championship collapse might be the most painful slow-motion disaster in golf history. You know what's worse than losing a tournament on the last hole? Losing it over the last 4 holes. That's exactly what happened to Adam Scott at Royal Lytham in St. Anne's, and let me tell you, it was painful to watch. Scott had a 4-shot lead with 4 holes to play. 4 shots. That's like having a 3-touchdown lead in the 4th quarter. But then came the collapse that nobody saw coming. Bogey at 15, okay, no big deal. Still 3 shots ahead. Bogey at 16, getting nervous but still leading by 2. Bogey at 17, lead down to 1. By the time Scott reached the 18th tee, you could practically feel the weight of an entire nation's expectations crushing down on his shoulders. The real gut punch? Ernie Els had finished his round long before, posting a score that nobody thought would win. He was probably halfway through his practice when Scott started his collapse. Els himself couldn't believe what was happening. He went from preparing for a runner-up speech to hoisting the claret jug. Golf fans everywhere were left wondering if Scott would ever recover from such a devastating blow. So, more than halfway through, and here's number 4. Dustin Johnson's 2015 US Open collapse, proof that lightning can indeed strike twice, and somehow even more painfully the second time around. Remember that bunker incident at Whistling Straits? Well, DJ wasn't done giving us heart-stopping major championship finishes. This was the scene, the 72nd hole at Chambers Bay, a course that looked more like a lunar landscape than a golf course. Johnson had just bombed his drive and hit an absolutely perfect second shot to set up a 12-foot eagle putt. Make it, and he wins his first major. 2-putt, and he forces a playoff with Jordan Spieth. Simple enough, right? The first putt wasn't great, sliding about 4 feet past the hole. Okay, no problem. DJ had been solid all day from short range. But then something happened. The comebacker for birdie never even touched the hole. It slid right by like the cup had some kind of force field around it. In the span of about 30 seconds, Johnson went from potential champion to shell-shocked runner-up. The worst part? This wasn't some no-name having a lucky week. This was Dustin Johnson, one of the most talented players in the world, three-putting from 12 feet with a major championship on the line. Breaking into the top 3 of our list, here's number 3. But before we reveal you the top 3 most painful meltdowns in major history, if you want to fix those 3 putts like DJ's, make sure to subscribe. Trust me, your scorecard will look way better. So now here's our top 3. Greg Norman's 1996 Masters collapse, the meltdown that all other meltdowns are measured against. This wasn't just a collapse, this was the mother of all collapses. Alright, Norman starts Sunday with a 6-shot lead. 6. That's not a lead, that's a canyon. To put this in perspective, in the previous 60 years of Masters history, nobody had ever lost a lead that big in the final round. Well, somebody had to be first, right? The collapse started slowly, almost imperceptibly. A missed putt here, a wayward drive there. Playing partner Nick Faldo, meanwhile, was like a shark smelling blood in the water. The lead started shrinking. 6 shots became 4, then 3, then 2. By the time they reached Amen Corner, you could literally see Norman crumbling. His trademark swagger was gone. The confident strut had become a defeated trudge. Shot by shot, hole by hole, the lead disappeared. Norman shot 78, turning a 6-shot lead into a 5-shot defeat. It was so painful that even Faldo, normally a stone-cold competitor, hugged Norman afterward and said, "I don't know what to say." Well, what can you say? How do you console someone who just lived through their worst nightmare on global television? Now, we've reached number 2. Rory McIlroy's 2011 Masters collapse, a meltdown so spectacular it actually helped create one of golf's biggest stars. But first, it had to break him. Back in 2011, a baby-faced 21-year-old from Northern Ireland, with a mop of curly hair and the golf world at his feet, McIlroy had been absolutely crushing it all week at Augusta. Like video game numbers crushing it. He opened with a bogey-free 65, added rounds of 69 and 70, and took a 4-shot lead into Sunday. The coronation was all but planned. Nobody could have predicted what happened next. The collapse started slowly. A few wobbles on the front 9, nothing major. Then came the 10th hole, and oh boy, did things get weird. The ball ended up between the cabins to the left of the fairway. Yes, you heard that right. Cabins. Most people didn't even know there were cabins on Augusta National. The TV cameras had literally never shown them before. That's how far off the map Rory had gone. By the time he reached the 13th hole, his ball was swimming with the fish in Race Creek. The final damage? A terrible round of 80. That's right. He went from leading the Masters to shooting the highest score of anyone in the field that day. And finally, the big one, number 1. Jordan Spieth's 2016 Masters collapse isn't just the most painful meltdown in golf history. It's a reminder that even the most bulletproof champions can come undone in the space of 3 horrible holes. Spieth was the golden boy of golf, defending Masters champion. Already had 2 majors at age 22, he'd led an incredible 7 straight rounds at Augusta National, a feat not even Tiger Woods had managed. As he made the turn on Sunday with a 5-shot lead, it seemed like we were watching the birth of a dynasty. Then, everything falls apart. Bogey at 10. Okay, no big deal. Bogey at 11. Getting a bit dicey. But what happened at the 12th hole? That's where this went from a regular collapse to something that'll be talked about for generations. 2 balls in the water, a visit to the bunker. When the dust settled, Spieth had made a quadruple bogey 7. That's right, he took 7 shots on a par 3. In the span of about 30 minutes, he went from leading by 5 to trailing by 3. What makes this one the most painful? It's not just the size of the lead or the speed of the collapse. It's the stage, the setting, and the player. This was Jordan Spieth, Mr. Consistency, the guy who seemed immune to pressure. This was Augusta National, where he'd looked unbeatable. And this was a collapse that happened so fast, so unexpectedly, that nobody could quite believe what they were seeing. Years later, Spieth would insist, "I didn't choke." Maybe he's right. Maybe it was just a technical flaw in his swing that picked the worst possible moment to show up. But for everyone watching that Sunday afternoon, it felt like we were witnessing something we'd never seen before, and hope to never see again. Oh, and if you enjoyed this video, we have another amazing video for you in the middle of the screen. Enjoy.